Matteo stood in front of his son's grave, his heart heavy with grief. It had been 6 months since James's death, but the pain still felt fresh. The military had called it an accident, a tragic car crash. But something about it never sat right with Matteo. James was a careful driver, and the details of the crash were suspiciously vague. Still, Matteo had no proof, no way to challenge the official story. All he had was a father's instinct that something was terribly wrong. The cemetery was quiet, the kind of silence that made you feel alone even when you weren't. Matteo knelt down, placing a bouquet of white lilies, James's favorite, on the grave. As he brushed his fingers over the cold marble headstone, his eyes caught something unusual. Near the base of the grave was a small hole in the ground. It looked deliberate, as if someone had dug it recently. Curiosity got the better of him. Matteo glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then began to dig around the hole with his hands. The soil was loose, easy to move. After a few minutes, his fingers touched something hard and smooth. He pulled it out. A small, waterproof metal box, the kind used to protect important documents. His heart raced. What was this doing here? And who had buried it? With trembling hands, Matteo opened the box. Inside was a stack of papers, neatly folded, and a small black ledger. He unfolded the first document, and his blood ran cold. It was a list of names, dates, and amounts of money. Some of the names were familiar: people in high positions, politicians, even a few military officers. At the top of the list was a name that made his stomach churn: Victor Kane. Matteo had heard of Victor Kane. Everyone had. He was a shadowy figure, rumored to be the head of a vast criminal empire involved in drug trafficking, money laundering, and worse. But what was his name doing in a box buried in James's grave? And why were there so many powerful people connected to him? Before Matteo could process what he was reading, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his sister Emily. "Call me ASAP, it's about James." Matteo's hands shook as he dialed her number. Emily picked up on the first ring. Her voice was urgent, almost frantic. "Matteo, listen to me carefully. I've been digging into James's death. There's something you need to know. It wasn't an accident. And it's bigger than we thought. Meet me at my place. Now." Matteo looked down at the box in his hands, then at James's grave. His son had been hiding something dangerous. And now it seemed that secret had come back from the dead to haunt him. Matteo clutched the metal box tightly as he drove to Emily's apartment. His mind raced with questions. What had James been involved in? Why was Victor Kane's name in that box? And who had buried it in his son's grave? The more he thought about it, the more he felt a knot of dread tightening in his chest. Emily lived in a small, cozy apartment on the outskirts of the city. When Matteo arrived, she was already waiting for him at the door. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with worry. She ushered him inside without a word, locking the door behind them. "What's going on, Emily?" Matteo asked, placing the box on her coffee table. "You said it wasn't an accident. What did you find?" Emily took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she picked up the box. "I started looking into James's death a few weeks ago. Something didn't add up. The police report was too clean, too perfect. So, I reached out to a few contacts, people who know how to dig deeper. That's when I found out about Victor Kane." Matteo's stomach churned at the name. "What about him?" Emily opened the box and pulled out the ledger. "This," she said, flipping through the pages, "is a record of payments. Millions of dollars moving through shell companies and offshore accounts. Victor Kane is at the center of it all. But that's not the worst part." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. "James's name is in here too." Matteo felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. "What are you saying? James was involved with Victor Kane?" Emily nodded, her expression grim. "It looks like it. From what I've pieced together, James was working undercover not for the military but for a secret task force investigating Kane's operations. They were trying to bring him down, but something went wrong. James must have gotten too close, and Kane found out." Matteo's fists clenched. "So his death wasn't an accident. It was a cover-up. Exactly, Emily said. And whoever buried this box in his grave wanted it to be found. They wanted someone to connect the dots. Mateo stared at the ledger, his mind spinning. But why us? Why now? Emily hesitated, then pulled out a folded piece of paper from the box. Because of this. She handed it to Mateo. It was a handwritten note, scribbled in a hurry. The words sent a chill down his spine. If you're reading this, I'm already dead. Victor Kane knows. He's coming for everyone involved. Tell the truth, expose him. But be careful. Trust no one, not even the agency. The note was signed, James. Mateo's heart shattered all over again. His son had known he was in danger. He had tried to leave a message, a warning, but it had come too late. Emily broke the silence. Mateo, we need to be smart about this. If Kane finds out we have this box, we're in danger too, but we can't let James's death be in vain. We have to expose the truth. Mateo nodded, his jaw set with determination. Where do we start? Emily pulled out her laptop. First, we need to decode this ledger. It's not just a list of payments, it's a map of Kane's entire operation. If we can figure out how it all connects, we can take him down. As they began to work, Mateo couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every creak of the apartment floor, every sound from the street outside made him tense. He knew one thing for certain. Victor Kane was a man who didn't leave loose ends. And now, Mateo and Emily were loose ends. Mateo and Emily spent hours hunched over the laptop, decoding the ledger. The more they uncovered, the more they realized the sheer scale of Victor Kane's operation. The ledger wasn't just a record of payments. It was a detailed account of drug shipments, money laundering schemes, and even names of high-ranking officials who were on Kane's payroll. It was a web of corruption that stretched far beyond what they had imagined. This is bigger than we thought, Emily whispered, her eyes scanning the screen. Kane isn't just a criminal, he's untouchable. Look at these names. Politicians, judges, even someone from the military. If we go public with this, we're not just going after Kane. We're going after the entire system. Mateo leaned back, running a hand through his hair. James knew what he was getting into. He must have known how dangerous this was. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't he ask for help? Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. He probably wanted to protect you. If Kane found out James was working undercover, he would have gone after everyone James cared about, including you. Mateo's jaw tightened. Well, Kane's already taken my son. I'm not letting him get away with this. As they continued to work, Emily noticed something unusual in the ledger. Mateo, look at this, she said, pointing to a series of entries. These payments are different. They're not going to politicians or officials, they're going to a private security firm, and the amounts are huge. Mateo frowned. A security firm? Why would Kane be paying them? Emily's eyes widened as she connected the dots. Because they're not just a security firm, they're mercenaries, Kane's private army. If he's paying them this much, it means he's planning something big. Something that requires muscle. Before they could discuss further, the lights in the apartment flickered and went out. The room was plunged into darkness. Mateo immediately stood up, his military instincts kicking in. Stay here, he whispered to Emily. I'll check the fuse box. He grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and cautiously made his way to the hallway. As he reached the fuse box, he heard a faint noise. A soft click, like the sound of a door being opened. His heart raced. Someone was in the apartment. Mateo turned off the flashlight and pressed himself against the wall, listening intently. The sound of footsteps echoed in the darkness, moving closer. He could hear muffled voices, but he couldn't make out what they were saying. Whoever they weren't here for a friendly visit. He crept back to the living room, where Emily was still sitting in the dark. We're not alone, he whispered. There's someone here. Emily's eyes widened in fear. What do we do? Mateo thought quickly. We need to get out of here. Now. He grabbed the ledger and the metal box, shoving them into a backpack. Emily grabbed her laptop and followed him to the fire escape. As they climbed out the window, they heard the sound of the apartment door being kicked open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the room. Go, go, Mateo urged, helping Emily down the fire escape. They moved as quickly and quietly as they could, but the sound of their footsteps on the metal stairs seemed deafening in the silence of the night. When they reached the ground, they didn't stop to look back. They ran through the alleyways, putting as much distance between themselves and the apartment as possible. Mateo's mind raced. How had Kane found them so quickly? Had they been followed? Or was there a traitor in their midst? As they finally stopped to catch their breath in a deserted park, Emily turned to Mateo, her face pale. "This is bad, Mateo. If Kane's men are already after us, we don't have much time. We need to get this information to someone we can trust, someone who can help us take him down." Mateo nodded, his expression grim. "We need to find someone inside the agency, someone who's not on Kane's payroll, but how do we know who to trust?" Emily hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "There's one person, an old contact of mine from my journalism days. He used to work for the agency. If anyone can help us, it's him." Mateo's eyes narrowed. "Who is it?" Emily took a deep breath. "His name is Agent Daniel Reyes. He's one of the few people I trust. But reaching out to him is risky. If Kane's men are watching us, they'll be monitoring our communications." Mateo clenched his fists. "We don't have a choice. We need to take the risk." For James, Emily nodded, her resolve hardening. For James. Emily dialed Agent Daniel Reyes' number, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the phone. The line rang once, twice, and then a deep, cautious voice answered. "This is Reyes. Who's calling?" "Daniel, it's Emily," she said, keeping her voice low. "I need your help. It's urgent." There was a pause on the other end. "Emily? It's been years. What's going on?" "I can't explain over the phone. We need to meet. Somewhere safe. Somewhere no one will find us." Reyes hesitated, then said, "There's an old safe house on the edge of the city. Abandoned warehouse off 7th and Elm. Meet me there in an hour. And Emily, be careful. If you're being followed, don't come." The line went dead. Emily turned to Mateo. "We've got a location, but we need to make sure we're not followed." Mateo nodded, his eyes scanning the dark park around them. "Let's move. Stay close to the shadows." They made their way through the city, sticking to back alleys and avoiding main streets. Every sound made them tense, a car engine, a distant shout, the rustle of leaves in the wind. Mateo kept the backpack with the ledger in the metal box close to his chest, his mind racing with the possibilities of what they might uncover next. When they finally reached the abandoned warehouse, it was eerily quiet. The building loomed in the darkness, its windows shattered, and its walls covered in graffiti. Mateo signaled for Emily to stay back as he approached the entrance, his hand resting on the knife he always carried. "Reyes?" he called out softly, his voice echoing in the empty space. A figure stepped out of the shadows, holding a flashlight. It was a man in his late 40s, with sharp features and a wary expression. He shone the light on Mateo and Emily, then lowered it when he recognized Emily. "You made it," Reyes said, his voice tense. "What's so important that you had to drag me out here in the middle of the night?" Emily stepped forward, holding out the ledger. "We found this. It's connected to Victor Kane and to my nephew James. He was working undercover, trying to bring Kane down. But Kane found out, and now James is dead. This ledger proves everything. Kane's operations, his connections, even his private army. But we need your help to expose him." Reyes took the ledger, flipping through the pages with a frown. His expression grew darker with each page he read. "This is explosive. If this gets out, it'll bring down half the city's power structure. But it's also a death sentence for anyone who touches it. Do you realize what you're getting into?" Mateo stepped forward, his voice firm. "We know the risks. But James didn't die for nothing. We're not backing down." Reyes studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right. I'll help you. But we need to move fast. If Kane's men are already after you, they won't stop until they get this ledger back. We need to get it to someone who can protect it. And us." "Who?" Emily asked. Reyes hesitated, then said, "There's a federal task force investigating Kane. They've been trying to build a case against him for years, but he's always been one step ahead. If we can get this ledger to them, it might be enough to finally take him down." Mateo's eyes narrowed. "Can we trust them?" Reyes sighed. I don't know. But right now, they're our best shot. Meet me at the old train yard tomorrow at dawn. I'll arrange for someone from the task force to be there. But be careful. If Kane's men are watching, they'll be expecting us to make a move. As they left the warehouse, Mateo couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. But they had no choice. They had to see this through. For James. The train yard was shrouded in a thick morning fog, the kind that made everything feel surreal and distant. Mateo and Emily arrived early, their breaths visible in the cold air as they scanned the area for any signs of movement. The abandoned train stood like silent sentinels, their rusted frames looming in the mist. Mateo kept the backpack with the ledger close, his senses on high alert. "Do you see anyone?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Mateo shook his head. "Not yet, but stay close. Something doesn't feel right." They moved cautiously through the yard, their footsteps crunching softly on the gravel. Reyes had told them to meet near the old maintenance shed, but as they approached, there was no sign of him or anyone else. The silence was unnerving. "Where is he?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with anxiety. Before Mateo could respond, a voice cut through the fog. "Over here." They turned to see Reyes stepping out from behind a train car. He looked tense, his eyes darting around as if expecting trouble. "You made it," he said, his voice low. "The contact from the task force should be here any minute. But we need to be ready. If Kane's men are watching, this is where they'll strike." Mateo's grip tightened on the backpack. "Let's make this quick. The sooner we hand over the ledger, the better." As they waited, the fog seemed to thicken, obscuring their view of the yard. Minutes passed, but no one arrived. Emily shifted uneasily. "Daniel, are you sure they're coming?" Reyes didn't answer. Instead, his eyes widened as he looked past them. "Get down!" he shouted. Mateo reacted instantly, pulling Emily to the ground as a shot rang out, echoing through the train yard. The bullet ricocheted off a nearby train car, sending sparks flying. Mateo rolled to his feet, his knife already in hand, as shadowy figures emerged from the fog. "It's a trap!" Reyes yelled, drawing a gun from his coat. "Kane's men are here." Chaos erupted as more shots were fired. Mateo grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her behind a train car for cover. Reyes returned fire, his shots precise and calculated, but the attackers were relentless. They moved with military precision, closing in from all sides. "We need to get out of here," Mateo shouted over the gunfire. Emily nodded, her face pale but determined. "The ledger, we can't let them get it." Mateo slung the backpack over his shoulder and peered around the edge of the train car. The attackers were advancing, their weapons trained on their position. Reyes was holding them off, but he was outnumbered. Mateo knew they had only one chance. "Follow me," he said to Emily. "Stay low and move fast." They darted from cover to cover, weaving through the maze of train cars as bullets whizzed past them. Reyes covered their retreat, but as they reached the edge of the yard, a shot rang out, and Reyes cried out in pain, clutching his side. "Daniel!" Emily screamed, turning back. "Keep going!" Reyes shouted, his voice strained. "I'll hold them off." Mateo hesitated, but Emily grabbed his arm. "We can't leave him." "We have to," Mateo said grimly. "If we don't get out of here, the ledger is lost. And so are we." Reluctantly, Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. They sprinted toward the fence at the edge of the yard, Mateo boosting Emily over before climbing after her. As they hit the ground on the other side, they heard the sound of engines roaring to life behind them. "They're coming after us," Emily gasped. Mateo grabbed her hand. "Run!" They raced through the streets, the sound of pursuit close behind. Mateo's mind raced as he tried to think of a plan. They couldn't keep running forever. They needed a place to hide, somewhere Kane's men wouldn't find them. As they turned a corner, Emily pointed to an old church ahead. "In there!" They burst through the doors of the church, slamming them shut behind them. The interior was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of incense. An elderly priest emerged from the shadows, his expression calm but concerned. "Can I help you?" he asked. Mateo hesitated, then said, "We need a place to hide. Just for a little while." The priest studied them for a moment, then nodded. "This way." He led them to a small room behind the altar, hidden by a heavy curtain. "Stay here. You'll be safe." As the priest left, Mateo and Emily collapsed onto the floor, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Emily looked at Mateo. her eyes filled with fear and determination. "What do we do now?" she asked. Mateo opened the backpack and pulled out the ledger. "We can't trust anyone, not even the task force. If Kane's men knew about the meeting, it means someone on the inside is working for him. We have to take this directly to the media. Expose everything." Emily nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then that's what we'll do." For James, the small room in the church felt like a sanctuary, but Mateo knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Kane's men were still out there, and it wouldn't take long for them to figure out where they had gone. He and Emily had to act fast. "We need to get this ledger to someone who can publish it," Emily said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Someone who can't be silenced or bought." Mateo nodded. "Do you have anyone in mind?" Emily thought for a moment, then pulled out her phone. "There's one person, a journalist I used to work with, Sarah Mitchell. She's with the Sentinel, and she's not afraid to go after powerful people. If anyone can get this story out, it's her." "Can we trust her?" Mateo asked. "With my life," Emily replied. "But we need to be careful. If Kane's men are monitoring communications, they'll be watching her too." Mateo handed her the phone. "Make the call, but keep it short." Emily dialed Sarah's number, her hands trembling slightly. The phone rang twice before Sarah answered. "Emily? It's been a while. What's going on?" "Sarah, I need your help," Emily said, her voice urgent. "I have a story, the biggest story of your career, but it's dangerous. If you take it, there's no turning back." There was a pause on the other end. "What kind of story?" "Victor Kane," Emily said. "Drug trafficking, money laundering, murder, and proof. Solid proof." Sarah's voice sharpened. "Where are you? I'll come to you." Emily hesitated, then said, "Meet us at the old printing press on 12th Street. 1 hour. And Sarah, come alone. Trust no one." She hung up and turned to Mateo. "She's in, but we need to get to the printing press before Kane's men figure out where we're going." Mateo nodded. "Let's move." They slipped out of the church through a back entrance, keeping to the shadows as they made their way through the city. The printing press was an abandoned building on the edge of the industrial district, a place Emily and Sarah had used years ago for confidential meetings. It was secluded, out of the way, and perfect for what they needed. When they arrived, Sarah was already waiting, her car parked discreetly behind the building. She was a tall woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor. As soon as she saw Emily, she stepped forward, her eyes narrowing with concern. "What's going on, Emily? You look like you've been through hell." "We have," Emily said, handing her the ledger. "This is everything. Names, dates, amounts, proof of Victor Kane's entire operation. But if you publish this, you'll be putting a target on your back." Sarah flipped through the ledger, her expression growing more serious with each page. "This is explosive. If this gets out, it'll bring down half the city's power structure, but it's also a death sentence for anyone involved." Mateo stepped forward. "We know the risks, but this is bigger than us. James, my son, died because of this. We can't let his death be in vain." Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll publish it, but we need to move fast. If Kane finds out we have this, he'll do everything in his power to stop us." As they began to plan, Mateo's phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. His heart sank as he read it. "You can't run forever. Hand over the ledger, or you'll regret it." Emily saw the look on his face and grabbed the phone. Her eyes widened as she read the message. "They're on to us. We need to get this story out now." Sarah pulled out her laptop and began typing furiously. "I'll draft the article and send it to my editor. Once it's live, there's no taking it back." As Sarah worked, Mateo and Emily kept watch, their nerves on edge. Every sound made them jump. A car engine, a distant shout, the creak of the old building settling. They knew Kane's men were close. It was only a matter of time before they found them. Finally, Sarah looked up. "It's done. The article is live. The Sentinel's servers are secure, so it can't be taken down. By morning, the whole world will know about Victor Kane." Mateo felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. The sound of engines roaring outside made his blood run cold. He peered through a crack in the boarded-up window and saw several black SUVs pulling up to the building. "They're here," he said, his voice grim. Emily grabbed his arm. "What do we do?" Mateo looked at Sarah. "Is there another way out of here?" Sarah nodded. "There's a back exit. It leads to the train tracks. If we move fast, we can lose them." "Then let's go," Mateo said. They slipped out the back door just as the front of the building was breached. The sound of shouting and footsteps echoed behind them as they ran along the train tracks, the cold night air biting at their faces. Mateo kept the backpack with the ledger close, his mind racing. They had done it. They had exposed Victor Kane. But the fight wasn't over, not yet. The train tracks stretched endlessly into the darkness, the only sound the distant hum of the city and the occasional rustle of wind. Mateo, Emily, and Sarah ran as fast as they could, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Behind them, the shouts of Kane's men grew louder. They were closing in. "We can't keep running forever," Emily panted, her voice strained. "We need a plan." Mateo glanced around, his mind racing. The tracks led to an overpass ahead, and beneath it was a network of alleys and streets. If they could lose their pursuers in the maze of the city, they might have a chance. "Under the overpass," he said, pointing. "We'll split up. It'll make it harder for them to follow us." Sarah nodded, her face pale but determined. "I'll head left. You two go right. Meet at the riverfront if you can shake them." Without another word, they split up, Sarah darting down a narrow alley while Mateo and Emily veered right, slipping into the shadows of the city. The sound of footsteps and shouting followed them, but the maze of alleys worked in their favor. Mateo led Emily through a series of twists and turns, his military training kicking in as he navigated the labyrinthine streets. Finally, they reached a quiet street near the riverfront. Mateo pulled Emily into a doorway, pressing a finger to his lips as they listened for signs of pursuit. The sounds of their pursuers had faded, but Mateo knew they weren't safe yet. "We need to keep moving," he whispered. "But we can't go back to the church or anywhere they might expect us to go." Emily nodded, her eyes scanning the street. "There's a safe house nearby. An old friend of mine owns a bookstore. She'll let us hide there until we figure out our next move." Mateo hesitated, then nodded. "Lead the way." They moved quickly but cautiously, sticking to the shadows as they made their way to the bookstore. When they arrived, Emily knocked on the door in a specific pattern. 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. After a moment, the door opened, revealing a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a wary expression. "Emily?" the woman said, her voice filled with concern. "What's going on?" "We need your help, Clara," Emily said. "We're in trouble." Clara stepped aside, ushering them in. "Come in, quickly." The bookstore was cozy, with shelves lined with books and the faint scent of coffee in the air. Clara led them to a back room where they could talk without being overheard. "What's happened?" Clara asked, her eyes darting between Emily and Mateo. Emily quickly explained the situation, leaving out as many details as she could to protect Clara. "We just need a place to lay low for a little while, until we can figure out what to do next." Clara nodded. "You can stay here, but you need to be careful. If this Victor Kane is as dangerous as you say, he won't stop until he finds you." Mateo set the backpack with the ledger on the table. "We've already exposed him. The story's out, but that just makes him more desperate." As they talked, Mateo's phone buzzed again. It was another message from the unknown number. "You think you've won? You've only made things worse. Hand over the ledger, or I'll make sure you regret it." Mateo showed the message to Emily, his expression grim. "He's not going to stop. We need to end this." Emily nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Then we end it, but we need to be smart about it." Before they could discuss further, the sound of breaking glass echoed from the front of the bookstore. Mateo's instincts kicked in and he grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her behind a bookshelf just as the door to the back room was kicked open. Kane's men had found them. The room erupted into chaos as gunfire filled the air. Mateo grabbed a heavy book from the shelf and hurled it at one of the attackers, knocking him off balance. Emily grabbed a fire extinguisher and sprayed it at the others, creating a cloud of white powder that obscured their vision. "This way!" Clara shouted, leading them to a hidden door behind a bookshelf. They slipped through just as the attackers regained their footing, the sound of gunfire echoing behind them. The hidden door led to a narrow staircase that descended into the basement. Clara locked the door behind them, her hands trembling. "There's a tunnel down here. It leads to the river. You can escape that way." Mateo nodded, his heart pounding. "Thank you, Clara. We won't forget this." Clara handed Emily a flashlight. "Go, and be careful." They moved quickly through the tunnel, the sound of pursuit fading behind them. When they finally emerged near the river, Mateo took a deep breath, the cool night air filling his lungs. "What now?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mateo looked at her, his expression resolute. "Now, we finish this. We take the ledger to the authorities, the real authorities. Not the task force, not the agency. Someone who can't be bought or silenced." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "For James." "For James," Mateo echoed. As they disappeared into the night, the city around them began to stir. The article Sarah had published was spreading like wildfire, and the name Victor Kane was on everyone's lips. The truth was out, and there was no putting it back in the box. But for Mateo and Emily, the fight wasn't over. Not yet. They had justice to deliver, and they wouldn't stop until it was done.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.